Hello and welcome to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. This week, the Big Ten enters the chat. One of the conferences that called off fall football, only to reconsider, kicks off. And since we never did a Big Ten preview leading into the season because of the initial postponement, we figured what better time than now to catch up on what's going down with Midwest football. Joining me to talk Big Ten football is the voice of the Big Ten, the face of the Big Ten, you might even say, Dave Revson from BTN. We'll whip around the league and talk about Ohio State's chances to repeat as champs and maybe even win a national championship. Michigan's next move with Jim Harbaugh. Where does Nebraska stand entering year 3 under Scott Frost? And can Penn State challenge the Buckeyes? Thanks for listening to the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. You can find us on Westwood One Podcast, Apple Podcast, just about anywhere you like to get your podcast. Please subscribe, and if you like what you hear, give us a good review and a good rating. It helps college football fans find us, and it helps us find more college football fans, and away we go. Joining me this week on the podcast, and I am always happy to have Dave Revson from the Big Ten Network. We have made this a little bit of a tradition over the last, I think this is probably 3 or 4 years now. Dave, you've come on here and previewed the Big Ten, but usually it's in August.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a different kind of season. I appreciate you coming on and previewing the start of the Big Ten season in October.
Yeah, thrilled to do it. It seemed for a while there this was a tradition that might end this year. So I'm really glad to be able to talk to you, Ralph, and to run through the league with you. It's something I've enjoyed in the years that we've done it previously.
I do want to keep it mostly on the field, but I feel like I would also be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about how we got here or how the Big Ten got here. So let's just hit a little bit of that. So much of this was played out very publicly with the Big Ten, sort of getting it from all sides. A lot of people, chiming in about what the Big Ten should do. Why do you think the Big Ten came back?
I think that the Big Ten came back because they believed they were at a point with testing where they could test every kid every day. I think the Big Ten's biggest hesitation, they didn't necessarily articulate it very well, frankly, in August, but I think their overarching kind of driving idea behind whether or not they would play the entire time and what kind of dictated it was being able to be in a position where they knew that no one on the field had the virus, or they had at least tested negative for the virus. I mean, I know there might be undetectable levels that there's nothing you can really do about, but that everyone had tested negative and that there was no lag time between that test. I think the concern was that if you're testing 3 days a week, let's say, just hypothetically, that what about those couple days in between? And that there was just kind of uncertainty there. So I think that was always the thing that the Big Ten was shooting for. I think that they overestimated how long that would take when they canceled the season in August or postponed it and said it would look like it would probably be a spring start, because I think that's when they believed that level of testing would be available. When it became clear that there was the ability to do daily testing now, they reversed course. And so I think that's kind of what it's been all along, is how can we have a situation where we feel like we're able to catch the virus and not put people on the field who could have the virus.
Right. And listen, it puts them in a delicate spot because we are going to try to play, or the Big Ten is going to try to play 9 games in 9 weeks, ideally. And we have seen how the rest of college football has played out. With some disruptions, I go back and forth on social media with people like that. Like, I don't know how to determine if it's too many disruptions. We've had, I think it's 33 FBS games that have been postponed or canceled. Is that too many? Is that a success? Is that failure? I don't know. But the Big Ten can't really afford any of this because it has a very small window to get into. And we'll see how it plays out. Maybe in the end, we'll find out that the Big Ten's daily testing was the key to an uninterrupted season, and it will turn out that the Big Ten, even though they stumbled on their way, ends up having the best season of all, right? The most fluid and consistent season of all. Or maybe they have not left themselves enough room for error, and they end up having a season where it doesn't play out as well as the other conferences. We will see. Again, I think we're all hopeful that everybody gets through with as many games as possible.
Well, they certainly have a really good plan, I think, at this point. There's, of course, the famous Mike Tyson line, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I suppose there is that kind of, that's what this virus is, right? It punches you in the face, and it's impossible to predict where it's going. I do think also, Ralph, I would say to this point, I mean, I think college football has been, if I were forced to say there was no gray area and it's been a success or it hasn't been a success, I tend towards it's been a success. I know there have been a lot of games postponed. I know we've had a lot of outbreaks, but I guess I feel like we're just in a spot now where people are much more understanding of things not being perfect. And I think that goes to my industry. You know, it's been interesting to kind of, as we have reinvented what a broadcast looks like and putting people on the air on Zoom calls or in ways that we would have never dreamed of doing it before, because there's an acceptance that this is the way that you get this done in a COVID environment. And I think it's kind of the same with college football, whereas I think having a game postponed for a virus would have seemed cataclysmic even a year ago. I think now people look at it and say, well, this is just kind of, we're trying to get through this, and this is going to happen. And so I think it's possible that not everyone plays the same number of games, and that you just accept that. And college football has always had a level of imperfection in terms of different leagues play different numbers of games, certainly different numbers of conference games anyway, play different numbers of games against FBS opponents. All of those things are kind of baked into the pie with college football. And so I don't know. I mean, is this that much different? I mean, it's obviously a different reason for things to be inconsistent from conference to conference, or even maybe to a certain extent within a conference. But I do think just in this day and age, we just wanted to see football. People want to have some sense of normalcy to the best that we can have it. And if that is at the expense of having everything be uniform across the board, I know from where I sit anyway, I'm comfortable with that. And a lot of people I've spoken to are as well.
All right, let's dive into Big Ten football here. And let's just start right at the very top, because Ohio State is really, really good. and they wanted to come back and play, not just because, hey, we want, this best experience for our players and things along those lines. They also realize the Buckeyes, they have a team that could win a national championship here. Is there any reason to think it is anything other than national championship or sort of bust, or, it's certainly Big Ten championship or bust for the Buckeyes this year? Am I missing something? Am I missing a flaw here on this beautiful painting that the Buckeyes and Ryan Day have put on the wall?
Well, not that I'm aware of. I will say this, and I'll just kind of give a caveat before our conversation as we dive in team to team. Every year, Howard Griffith and Jerry Donardo and I get on a tour bus, and we go around the league and we watch every single team practice. And we form opinions on every team based on access that most people don't get. And it is incredibly valuable. It's certainly very valuable to those guys. I have found it to be very valuable to me in my own way. I obviously don't analyze it in the way that they did, because I didn't play the game. I didn't coach the game. I don't have the depth of knowledge they do, though I've been covering it for a long time, and I feel pretty good about my observations about college football. But this is different this year. And so if there is a flaw with Ohio State that isn't obvious on paper, but might become obvious in week one, or if there's anything, there's just kind of a lot of stuff we don't know about, where I would say that I'm flying blind in a way. It has made me appreciate just how valuable the preseason tour is. I mean, I think I always knew it intellectually. This is really important for us, but you really understand kind of as teams go through quarterback battles and you don't get to see both guys in practice. I mean, there is value in that. So I don't know anything about Ohio State offhand. I mean, I would say defensive tackle is probably the area that most teams in the country would be happy to take the defensive tackles at Ohio State and run with them. But I mean, if there is an area where you say, okay, maybe they're not quite at the level that, or they don't have proven experience there, I think that might be the one side, where you'd say, okay, I'm not 100% sure that they have proven guys here, but beyond that, I think this is a team that, and I'm fairly confident they'll find the answers they need at defensive tackle, but I think this is going to be an incredibly good team. Offensively, you obviously have one of the great quarterbacks in the country in Justin Fields. I think he'll be fine at running back, whether it's Trey Sermon or Master Teague or kind of whatever they end up doing there. The offensive line's great. I mean, the guys who opted back in for them make a huge difference. And, Wyatt Davis would be on the offensive side, that guy, and of course, Sean Wade in the secondary. So I don't see an obvious flaw. I just think maybe just the notion of you didn't get all your spring practice. You had this unconventional preseason. I mean, I think those things are factors for everyone, but they're no more a factor for Ohio State than they are for anyone else.
This was a topic of conversation a lot last year because it was Day's first full year. Now that you've seen him in there, I think we've all kind of gotten to know him a little bit, though I imagine you so a little more because your focus is Big Ten country. Why do you think he has been such a nice fit coming after Urban Meyer?
I think he is different from Coach Meyer, and Coach Meyer would be the first to tell you this, that Ryan might be a little more, might give the impression of being somewhat more laid back, I think, than Urban, just kind of being younger. I think is part of that too, although certainly there are young people who aren't laid back, but just kind of that idea of connecting maybe in a slightly different way. But I think he still has the fanatical attention to detail that Urban does. I think he learned a lot from being around him. He's had some other coaching proteges as well, or coaching mentors, I should say, as well, that I think have helped him along the way. And so I think Ryan Day is a nice mix of the old school of we are going to dot every I and cross every T, but also kind of that newer school of we're going to be a little bit more laid back and relating to guys. And again, I'm not saying Urban didn't relate to guys. I think it was just different. He was brought up in kind of a different coaching era than Ryan Day was brought up. So to me, I think that's been the mix. And then, look, all of the things that you have to do to be successful at Ohio State, Ryan Day can do. And front and center of those is recruit really high-level players. And recruiting has not missed a beat. I think he kind of understands where recruiting's going and a lot of the social media components of it. And so I just think he's been the perfect fit. And Urban Meyer knew that Ryan Day was the perfect fit. Urban Meyer said, this is the guy, and told Gene Smith, this is the guy. And so Urban saw it too, that there's just something special there with Ryan Day.
We have seen an Ohio State team amazingly get better last year after Urban Meyer left. Yeah. I think last year's was that with as great as Meyer's run was, that was the best Ohio State team I've seen. Full stop. That was the best Ohio State team I've seen. Maybe I can go back to one of John Cooper's teams and find one of the teams that maybe took a misstep late. Some of those heartbreaking teams in that they were really good, but they didn't quite finish the deal. But this team seemed to be the best Ohio State team I've seen. I don't know if there's going to be a drastic fall off this year. So the big picture question is, are we just sort of like coronating Ohio State this year? Where do you see possibilities of like, okay, this team has a chance to take down the Buckeyes, or maybe that team has a chance to take down the Buckeyes either within the season or in a Big Ten championship game?
Well, in a one-game Big Ten championship game scenario, I mean, I don't think you can rule out whoever they're playing, right? I mean, this is an Ohio State program. And I don't mean this in a negative sort of way at all, but I mean, they went into Purdue and lost. They went into Iowa and lost. I mean, you could be beaten in one game. And again, that doesn't, I mean, Iowa has been in the Big Ten championship game and is a high level program. And again, there's no shame in losing those games. I guess I'm just saying they can be beaten in a one game scenario. I think the most obvious team that could beat them kind of on their regular season schedule is Penn State. Penn State got some really tough news this week with Journey Brown perhaps being out for the year, it sounds like. And that's pretty shocking. And that is a major, major loss, although I do think they have a very deep running back room. But I think Penn State made a huge change in the offseason. Ricky Ronnie left to take the Old Dominion job. I think getting Kirk Ciarrocca as offensive coordinator is a home run, maybe a grand slam. I mean, he did an incredible job at Minnesota. He's been PJ Fleck's right-hand guy. That offense really hummed last year. Ciarrocca's a Pennsylvania guy. I think that is a perfect fit for him. He inherits a really good quarterback in Sean Clifford, who fits into that mold of people who would work well in his RPO offense. And then they've got guys. I mean, they have, if you talk about, do you have first-round draft picks on your team? They do. I mean, Pat Freiermuth will probably be the first tight end to come off the board, first or second maybe, in the NFL draft. They have some other guys who are, kind of freaky athletes. Jason Oweh is, on the defensive line is one of those guys who I know the NFL scouts really like. Shaka Toney is really talented, and is he a first-round pick? Is he a second-round pick? He's somewhere in there. So, I mean, to beat Ohio State, I think to a certain extent you have to have some players who are at the caliber of Ohio State, and Penn State has recruited extremely well. So I think Penn State's that next team. They get them early, which I think helps. They get them in State College. I don't know whether that makes a difference or not. This year, it certainly would have made a difference if it were a whiteout with more than 100,000 people there. Of course, they don't have the advantage of having that. But I really like this Penn State team, and to me, they'd probably be that next one. Again, of the teams on the regular season schedule for Ohio State, they're, to me, far and away the more logical one that can knock them off.
You mentioned Minnesota and the trajectory that PJ Fleck, they really took off last year. It was such an interesting year for them. I think a lot of people sort of saw a possible breakthrough coming, and then Minnesota wins a bunch of close games early against not exactly the most awesome competition, but you win. And sometimes maybe when you win, you sort of, you gain in confidence and you don't really pay attention to your flaws if you're a young team that wins, right? You sort of learn how to win, and as you gain the confidence, you start playing like a team that really is an undefeated and good team. And I think that was sort of the arc of Minnesota's season. We think then, okay, well, they did that, then how they should be even better this year. But sometimes that doesn't always work out, right? Like the linear, your progression is not always linear. What do you think as far as progression this year from a team like Minnesota, where clearly they've got a good base of talent, but can they replicate a special season like they did last year?
Well, to me, some of it is going to be based on the coaching move, right? So Ciarrocca leaves. They bring in Mike Sanford. It's kind of been a mixed bag with Mike Sanford, frankly. I did play-by-play for one of his Western Kentucky team's games against Illinois, and this was the year after Jeff Brom had been there, and they were putting up crazy point totals, and they had a lot of the same personnel back, and they were putrid on offense, frankly. Is that Mike Sanford's fault? Not necessarily, but I'm just saying he's the head coach. He had, some success certainly at some stops. I think had some really good offenses times at Notre Dame, but there's going to be a lot on him and kind of, okay, can you pick up this mantle and run with it? And again, an accomplished guy who's been well-traveled, but that's going to be one of the question marks. They got a huge opt back in with Rashad Bateman. I mean, for people who didn't see him last year for whatever reason, that's a guy who averaged more than 20 yards a catch. I mean, he was just spectacular. He was the Big Ten receiver of the year, and they had Tyler Johnson, who was a fabulous receiver in his own right, who went over 1,300 yards receiving on that team as well. And yet Rashad Bateman won receiver of the year in the league. They were fantastic last year at the skill positions. Tanner Morgan had an incredible year. So again, a lot of those guys back. Tyler Johnson is not, but Bateman's back. Chris Ottman-Bell's really talented. They have a former 1,000-yard back in Muhammad Ibrahim, so they have a really good running back. And then their offensive line is huge and experienced. So I think offensively, if they make that transition at coordinator, I think they'll be great. To me, the question's on defense. I mean, they lost a lot of production here. Antoine Winfield and Kamal Martin and Carter Coughlin. They lost 5 of their top 6 tacklers. It was a really good defense. Joe Rossi's done a tremendous job. He took over about halfway through the season in 2018, and their defense had just been torched. I mean, they looked awful. And Joe Rossi turned it around mid-season and got them on track, and they've been really good ever since. So I feel like they probably can figure something out on the defensive side, but I do think that's where the concerns are, to me, much less than on offense, just given the personnel that they bring back on that side. But, yeah, look, this is the next step now is, the West remains in a spot where can somebody step up and take control? Wisconsin has, to a large extent. They have been the perennial best team. There have been a couple of years where they haven't made the Big Ten championship game, but by and large, they've been that team. And I know Minnesota looks across the border and says, why not us? Why can't we be what Wisconsin has been? And that's what PJ Fleck's trying to do.
Yeah, let's stick with the West in general, because I think last year we looked at it and, Wisconsin was coming off a little bit of a bad year, so that I think lowered the expectations for Wisconsin, because Wisconsin has been, Wisconsin has really been, you could almost say, the dominant team in the West. Maybe not to quite the extent that Ohio State has, but Wisconsin keeps, is getting to that championship game more than most of the teams over in the West. Not that Iowa hasn't been good and Nebraska is still trying to find its footing, but Wisconsin has been the bear. So I think we expected Wisconsin. Because Wisconsin was coming off a little bit of a bad year, there was this look going into last year that, this could be a really wide open race. And Nebraska was picked before the season, and that didn't work out very well, possibly because they just had a little bit of a weaker schedule. I still think, Wisconsin is now a little bit more of the clear favorite again. Minnesota getting some respect, and so same thing with Iowa. But Wisconsin is sort of going back to being just Wisconsin churning out things. But I think that maybe we were a year ahead of that, and I think this could be that year where it's really a big jumble in the West, where maybe Nebraska finally takes that step forward. So when you sort of are forecasting what goes on in the West, do you see, what I thought we had last year, which is maybe 3, 4, 5 teams that could possibly contend? Or do you see it as, okay, no, there's a little separation from the top to the bottom tier?
I think there may be some separation with Wisconsin and Minnesota, although Wisconsin has a ton of question marks now. I mean, I think what happened last year to really solidify Wisconsin to me was that Jack Cohn had a great year. He stepped up, whereas if you recall, when he had to play the year before, when Alex Hornibrook was kind of in and out of the lineup, Jack Cohn wasn't great. And Hornibrook left. Jack Cohn takes over, and there's kind of this thought of, man, I'm not sure they really have a quarterback. Well, he proved a lot of people wrong. I mean, the guy completed nearly 70% of his passes. He was in the top 3 in the Big Ten in passing efficiency, but he injured his foot in the preseason. I talked to Paul Chris this morning, and he told me 4 to 10 weeks. So, I mean, it's possible Jack Cohn doesn't play at all this year. So now all of a sudden, Graham Mertz takes over a quarterback. The guy's thrown 10 passes in his career. 9 of them have been complete. He's very highly regarded. He's the highest recruited quarterback to sign with Wisconsin in kind of the online recruiting era, such as it is. So this is a player who people have high expectations around, but we haven't really seen a whole lot of him. They lose a guy who would have been the all-time leading rusher in college football had he stuck around this year and had even a moderately decent year in Jonathan Taylor. They don't have a clear-cut successor. Paul was telling me today, I don't really see us necessarily having a feature back. Nakia Watson, Garrett Groshek, those guys maybe kind of rotating. Isaac Garendo is a very minimally used player who might be in that rotation as well. So I think there are a lot more question marks about Wisconsin maybe than we had a couple weeks ago. Certainly more question marks around the quarterback spot. But I think they'll be really good on defense. I mean, almost everyone is back. Jim Leonard has done an amazing job there and has really they have not missed a beat with him as their defensive coordinator. In fact, I would argue they've probably gotten better. They lose a couple big-time players at linebacker and Zach Bond and Chris Orr, but they return essentially everyone else. So I think they'll be really good on defense. I think the questions for them are on offense. Again, back to your original question, I think maybe a little separation with them and Minnesota. I'm not sure it's not Minnesota ahead of them on paper, given the question marks that we have with the quarterback spot at Wisconsin. I think, again, does Graham Mertz answer the bell there? But then after that, I think you can throw them all in a hat. I mean, all you have to do is look at Northwestern in the last 2 years, right? I mean, they went 8-1. They beat every single team in the West when they went 8-1. And then the next year, the only team they beat was Illinois. They went 1-8. And like they could be in that mix again. They got Peyton Ramsey at quarterback, the transfer from Indiana. They have a really highly regarded offensive coordinator coming in Mike Bajaki, and they had a good defense last year. They were just inept on offense. Purdue was totally banged up last year. They have maybe the best wide receiver duo in the Big Ten. Nebraska's been building, gradually getting better on defense. They have interesting battle at quarterback. Looks like Adrian Martinez emerging here, at least in the short term. So you can kind of go through every single team in the West. Iowa, again, I think Iowa will be really talented at the skill positions at wide receiver. They're as good as maybe they've been in the entire time we've been around with BTN. You just have the quarterback question and whether Spencer Petras can step up. So you can look at every team in the West and say, man, I could make an argument for them. Yeah, Illinois got better last year, made it to a bowl game. Can they take another step forward? So it's pretty wide open. I'd say maybe a little bit of separation with Minnesota and Wisconsin, and everyone else just throw them in a hat, Ralph, and see what happens.
Yeah, it's so interesting with Wisconsin, the idea that they you almost assume that one of those running backs will just be awesome, right? Because it's Wisconsin, right? So Watson or somebody somewhere on that roster is another great running back, right? Maybe we haven't even seen him yet, but somewhere on that. But
I guess I would just say, like, I not to interrupt, but I feel like I've seen enough of Nikhil Watson and Garrett Groshek, and I may eat these words, but I've seen enough of those guys to think I don't think they are great running backs. I don't again, I understand no one's going to replace Jonathan Taylor, but I think they're good. I think they're both solid guys, and they have interesting skill sets. Like Groshek can really catch the ball out of the backfield, and he's a great third down back. They have a freshman, Jalen Berger from New Jersey. Have they ever gotten a good running back out of New Jersey at Wisconsin? Maybe one or two I can think of. Maybe he becomes that guy. I'm not saying they can't have a 1,000-yard back, although in 8 or 9 games that might be tough to do. But I'm just saying, I don't know that there's a guy who you're going to look at. And again, not just saying Jonathan Taylor, but just kind of in that pantheon of having a really good back every year. I don't see it in either of those two. But again, maybe I'm wrong.
And I'm kind of with you, actually, Dave, too. I think that was sort of the point I was sort of backing into. It's like you just assume that they're going to have one, but maybe they won't. Is that even possible? And the Cohen thing is, Jack Cohen thing is interesting in that, listen, I think there's a certain amount of Wisconsin fans, and this happens with every fan base. The next quarterback is always the one you're really excited about, especially when he's got a few stars, recruiting stars next to his name. And Jack Cohen was a lot like a lot of Wisconsin quarterbacks, right? He did a really efficient job. He was a darn good player. He might not have been a spectacular player, but he was a darn good player. But I do think that there is this sort of love of the unknown. And I think Wisconsin fans sort of saw what happened with Cohen. Not that they were happy, but sort of look at Mertz and think, ooh, wait, the shiny new thing will make us even better. Maybe that happens. Again, you get 4 stars next to your name for a reason. But I just thought that was an interesting thing that developed when the injury was reported. You could sort of get the sense of when you're checking in with the Wisconsin fans online that, oh boy, now we get to see what Mertz has going on, and we'll see. But you have to be very careful what you wish for sometimes. That reliable upperclassman sometimes goes a long way, especially when you're a Wisconsin team that is built the way Wisconsin is.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I do think there's a little be careful what you wish for. I mean, again, I just go back to the guy was, he completed 70% of his passes. I mean, he was really, really good. And again, I don't think any Wisconsin fan is wishing ill. And I'm not suggesting you're saying that on Cohen, but I get it. I get why you're excited about Mertz. I'll say when we were at camp last year, it was clear that Cohen was way ahead of Mertz. Now, Mertz was a true freshman. I mean, that's what it is. And again, in very limited duty last year, Mertz proved to be extremely accurate, and he clearly had a big arm when we saw him. That's where I wish I could have gone to preseason camp this year and seen. But again, I know he was really highly thought of and heavily recruited and all those things, and I'm sure he's a really talented guy. But now you run into this issue where, if something happens to him, the guys behind him, Chase Wolf and Danny Vandenboom, I think have thrown 2 career passes between them. So quarterbacks get hurt. I mean, it's just, this is kind of what it is. You've got COVID protocol. Heaven forbid someone gets COVID. They're out 3 weeks at a minimum in the Big Ten. So it just reduces your margin for error significantly, looking at it from the point of view of losing your starter.
Okay, we're going to take a very quick break here in the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast. We're going to come back with Dave Revson from Big Ten Network. We'll finish up our Big Ten preview in October right after this.
Hey, it's Michael Rosenbaum. You may remember me as Lex Luthor from the hit TV show Smallville. Regardless, I have this really cool podcast called Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum, where I get celebrities who are a lot more famous than me to really open up. Let's get inside of Jim Jeffries.
Oh, I never did anything with my life. I could have been a better son. Oh, God. I should apologize to this person.
So, join me on Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum. New episodes drop every Tuesday. Listen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your shows.
We're back with Dave Revson from the Big Ten Network. All right, so I saved this. I wanted to get a little clear. I want to have like a clear runway for this question because it's always the most interesting thing, right? As great as Ohio State is, as good as all the other teams are in the Big Ten, as interesting as the races will be, is there anything ever more interesting than what the hell's going on with Michigan and Jim Harbaugh? He has, without question, raised the level of Michigan from where he found it. We have seen Michigan go through hard times, and since Harbaugh has been there, they have been absolutely better than they were. But they have not quite maybe maxed out. They have not quite reached the heights that were hoped for when Jim Harbaugh came there. He also has a contract with, I believe, 14 months left in it, which is very odd for college football. You can't help but start thinking, well, maybe this is an opportunity for both parties to sort of say, okay, we've done a lot here. Let's see how this season goes, and maybe we go our separate ways. They're just always the most fascinating team, even if they're not the best team. What is your read on what Michigan could be this year? And I hate to even do this, the idea of trying to get into Jim Harbaugh's head and trying to figure out where he thinks he's going, because that would be a very interesting place to be. But give me your assessment of Michigan and give me your assessment of sort of the state of Jim Harbaugh.
Look, there's two sides to this Michigan discussion. I think you outlined them really well. Like, let's be honest with where it is. In the 7 years before he got there, they finished in the AP top 20, like how I work in the AP there.
I appreciate that. Very much appreciate the brand there, brand pop.
They finished in the AP top 20 once in 7 years before he got there. He's been there 5 years. They finished in the top 24 times. So they are much better, and you said that. They are much better than when he got there. However, he's 0-5 against Ohio State. It's the first person ever at Michigan to do that. They've given up 118 points in the last two meetings between those two schools. This is the program that's won the most Big Ten championships of all time. They have a 15-year Big Ten title drought, which is their longest ever. So again, there are two sides of the coin. One is they are significantly better than where they were when he took over. It is indisputable. The second is they have not reached the goals that they are accustomed to at Michigan. I think that's also indisputable, and I think no one would dispute that less than Jim Harbaugh, right? Like, he is a fiercely competitive guy, and he wants to win. And essentially what they have been is the third-place team in the East. There's been maybe an exception here or there, but that's basically what they are. They are the third-place team, and in the toughest division in college football. They've been, an inch away from being the first-place team. I get it. But the bottom line is they've been the third place team. And now you lose 10 players to the NFL draft. I mean, only LSU had more players chosen in the draft than Michigan did. Ohio State also had 10 guys picked in the draft. But again, they've recruited better than Michigan has. So what are they going to be this year? Again, this is where I would have loved to have gone to camp. We saw Joe Milton a little bit last year. People have seen him a little bit on the field.
If there was one team that you would want to see a little bit of, it was this team, right?
Absolutely. Joe Milton's a big physical kid. I remember coming out of their camp last year and saying, I think they have three quarterbacks who can play. I believe I said that on the air for BTN. So I certainly believed in Joe Milton. But the guy's thrown 11 career passes and two of them have been intercepted. So, he doesn't have a ton of experience and let's see what that brings. To me, I'm really concerned about the offensive line. They lose a ton there, NFL level players. And then I'm just fascinated by what this defense is with Don Brown, because, look, when they overmatch the opponent in terms of talent, they are awesome. I mean, they are so good. You've got the blitzes coming from every direction. Teams just don't know what to do with them. The issue is that when they've come up against teams with like talent or even in slightly superior talent, I think that defense has struggled. I mean, 4 straight years, they've lost at least their last 2 games, Ohio State and the bowl game. So those are games against teams where the level of the opposition is similar or better. And they've given up 39 points per game in those 8 games, including, again, Ohio State marching up and down the field against them these last 2 years. So that's the challenge. The challenge to me is, can you replace the talent that you lost to the NFL, and then can you get better in the big games? And those are going to be the questions.
There's a little bit of a broader discussion here. I'm interested to get your opinion on it because, again, you've unfortunately with the Big Ten, it sort of sidelined you a little bit. But now you're going to get a chance to spread your wings and get your opinions out there a little more and have a bigger platform now that the games are starting in the Big Ten. What we've seen in the conversation in college football over the last month or so is this, hey man, now listen, it's been trending this way literally for more than a decade, but defense is dead, right? Like we're just,
yeah.
And what I mean mostly by that is when the two teams are similar, the offense will probably get the best of things. When the two teams have similar talent, we will probably have more of an offensive game than a defensive game. And the elite teams are the ones that can do some elite things offensively with a star quarterback and multiple weapons on the outside. That's what Ohio State is. That's what Alabama is. That's what Clemson is. And that's what LSU was last year when they rose up for their great season. And the Big Ten's always going to be built a little differently, especially over in the West, because you're dealing with, teams that are sort of built around big offensive lines that are a little more run oriented. But even with that said, there's an explosiveness that we expect from Wisconsin now, and even Minnesota's able to do it with Bateman and things along those lines. And I think last year that was sort of what we were looking for with Michigan. Can they become that explosive offense? There were moments of it. We saw glimmers of it, especially later in the season when they sort of pulled themselves out of what seemed like a season spinning out of control, and they found some explosiveness. And again, I know you didn't see him, so it's hard to make that, but I think that's the question, right? Can Milton and can they build an explosive offense? Can Josh Gaddis build an explosive offense around Milton and be, because I think that's what you need to be an elite team.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think this has been the challenge for some programs in the Big Ten that have historically been built around defense, right? I think this, to a certain extent, was the challenge for Mark D'Antonio at the end at Michigan State, where he still had elite defenses, but the offense just really went in the tank. It's what we saw at Northwestern last year. They were a very good defensive team. But, like, if you're scoring 18 points a game, or I didn't think it was that, 13, whatever it is, like, it's impossible to win in this day and age. And so I agree with you. I mean, this is the challenge. Now, Michigan makes so many plays on defense. Like, they're an explosive defense, right, where they're in your grill and they force turnovers and they create havoc. And so that puts your offense in a better position. But, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Like Josh Gaddis, we were kind of led to believe this is what it was going to be. It was going to be this more explosive attack, and they just weren't. And so, where does that come from? I don't know. I mean, again, I would have loved to have seen, I know they're really high on Giles Jackson, who played a really minimal role last year. I would have really liked to have seen him. Their experience at running back, can they become a little more explosive there? Maybe it's Hassan Haskins taking a bigger role. Perhaps he can be that guy, or, Chris Evans coming back after sitting out last year. Again, kind of, where is that piece? I don't totally know. I mean, A.J. Henning's a really highly touted freshman who's explosive. Maybe he becomes, we saw with Rondale Moore 2 years ago, you can insert a guy who's really just uber talented as a freshman. He can make an enormous difference on your team right away. So I don't know where that guy is. Again, I think that's the limitation of not having seen them. But I agree with your premise, like with that thesis that for Michigan to really become what they want to be, they have to find those pieces, whoever they are.
Yeah, because that's how you beat those. When you talked about Ohio State and the bowl games, right? Those games where you're sort of you're supposed to be looking somebody eye to eye. This is supposed to be games against your true peers, and those are the games that Michigan certainly believes Ohio State is its peer, and those big bowl games where supposedly you're facing your peers. In those games, these days in college football, you need to score a bunch of points. So the other team that's always super fascinating because of its name and its heritage and where it's been is Nebraska. And a couple of years ago, they grabbed Scott Frost in many ways the way Michigan did with Harbaugh, right? We identified our guy. We're going to bring this former quarterback of ours back home, and he is going to be our savior. Now, and again, this is one of the reasons why I'm always hesitant to bag too much on Harbaugh compared to what Scott Frost has done over the last couple of years. Harbaugh has done a lot better than that. So I think we shouldn't dismiss how well Harbaugh has done there, because it's not that easy to get things turned around, as Scott Frost is finding out at Nebraska. It has been hard to get things turned around there. Is this a season where you think we can start see? Because I don't know. I guess you could make the argument that, well, they won 5 games last year, 4 games the year before. That's progress, right? But do you think this is a year where we finally see some progress that makes you think, oh, okay, now I understand what they're trying to get to at Nebraska? Because for the first 2 years, I'm not 100% sure what exactly they're trying to get to at Nebraska.
Well, I fell into this trap a little bit last year. I mean, even after seeing them in camp, I thought they were going to be much better than they were. So I say, if there's value in going, and I do think there's value in going, but sometimes you still get it wrong. And I got it a little bit wrong with Nebraska last year. And a lot of it had to do with the injury to Adrian Martinez. He was just never himself and just didn't make that jump. But it felt like it was rarely himself. Like I would say, like the Illinois game, he was himself, and their offense marched up and down the field in that game. So, but he got banged up, and he went from second in the Big Ten in total offense as a freshman, and really just looking like he was going to be a superstar, to a guy who struggled a little bit last year, and again, a ton of that was injuries. It sounds like it was really close in the quarterback battle, just based on what Scott Frost said yesterday in his news conference. Essentially saying he looks at his 2 starters, and that had Luke McCaffrey been the incumbent quarterback, that maybe he would be starting the opener. So it seems like that's a little bit up in the air there. To me, for them to make a jump, I think first of all, their schedule is absolutely brutal. So that's really hard. I mean, when you have Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Penn State among your first 4 games, with a game against Northwestern in there as well. And then you still play Minnesota as well as a divisional game that, again, is against an elite team. So that's pretty challenging. I think 4-4 would be a massive accomplishment for Nebraska this year, just based on the way the schedule played out. But I do think there are some signs. I think the offensive line will definitely be better. They bring back everyone. They got better and better as the year went on. That's been a little bit of a head scratcher to me, kind of why they haven't been able to be better at that position, the position where historically they've been great. And then I do think they've made improvements under Eric Chinander on defense. They had a long way to go. They were absolutely abysmal defensively in the last year under Mike Riley. And then, when these guys took over, they have gotten better here. They still have to be stronger against the run. And I think, to me, that's where I look at the point of attack, are you going to become a better team here? They gave up nearly 6 yards per carry against conference opponents last year. I want to say it was like 5.7. It was the worst in the Big Ten. It just feels so non-Nebraska, and they lose a lot in the front 7. So to me, that's the big question mark for them, is can they make a jump there up front on defense? I think they have some weapons on offense. I love Wan'Dale Robinson. I think if he stays healthy, he got injured last year as well, but a really talented freshman, again, kind of in that Rondale Moore mode where you can line him up all over the place and figure out ways to incorporate him into your offense. So I think the offense should be better. I guess, to me, defense will dictate what kind of jumps they can make, and then also, of course, dealing with how difficult the schedule is.
Okay, to wrap here, I want to talk broadcasting, because you made some mentions earlier, and it sort of triggered something in my brain to make me want to circle back around. Listen, a lot of people, I know you're still working. You have been working, Dave, but a lot of people are going to be tuning in now to Big Ten Network a little more often, a little more frequently, because there are going to be games on. How are things going to be different? What will they? In other words, if a viewer flips on BTN, will they see some differences now in what you do, maybe in the way the games are showed, that are different from pre-COVID?
I don't think it will look that different on the air to someone who just kind of flips in. The one thing I will say is just there are some limitations in terms of how close together people can be in the studio. And so we may kind of spread out. You might not have as packed a desk as you would normally have in terms of myself and then the analysts. They might be in different spots throughout the studio or whatnot. But other than that, and all that stuff's still kind of being worked out. But other than that, I think it'll look very similar. I think the game broadcasts will look similar. I think we've gotten used to it in the sports world. We've gotten used to stadiums being empty, and for all intents and purposes in the Big Ten, they're going to be empty. I think each player is maybe given 4 tickets, I believe, and then staff members and coaches. So, you might have 1,500 or 2,000 people or whatever it is in the stadium. But for all intents and purposes, it's an empty stadium compared to what we normally see in Big Ten country. So I think that stuff will be different, but our announcers are going to be at the games. I don't think any of that will look different to someone who tunes in. I have to just give a ton of credit to our engineering staff. Has been amazing. I mean, the things that we've done, and it's really in the weeds, and it's kind of like broadcast geek stuff that if you're really into the media, you'd be interested in, but I won't bore people too much, but just kind of the stuff that we've been able to pull off technically is just mind-boggling to me. And it's stuff I never would have ever thought we could have done as recently as 7 months ago. So I give a ton of credit to them, all the people who run BTN, from our president, Francois McGillicuddy, and Mark Holsey is our executive producer, and all the other people who have kind of had an imprint on what we've done here. It's been amazing. It has been like such a team effort, and I'm so proud of where we've gotten. So I hope the Big Ten fans will tune in on Saturday, and what they'll see is a normal broadcast. I mean, our pregame show is not going to be on site, the tailgate show. We've said that. Again, it just felt like it flew in the face a little bit of what the conference was trying to do, and so we're keeping everyone here, but we'll still have a 2-hour tailgate show that covers every single team in the league in far greater depth than anyone else does, because that's what we do. We only cover 14 teams. It's not a shot at anyone else. We have great broadcasters who we're proud of, and I think we will give great content to people. But yeah, it might look a little different, but I hope that at home, everyone will just kind of give themselves permission to enjoy it. Like, I just think we're in a really weird spot, Ralph, and I don't want to get too philosophical, but, the world has been turned upside down. People have lost jobs. Some people have lost loved ones. We're in, a heated political climate. I mean, there's just a lot going on right now. And without being too preachy, I hope people will just allow themselves the luxury of just saying, you know what, for 3.5 hours, I'm just going to lose myself in this football game because I care about this school or I care about the state or whatever it is. I love this stuff. And because that's what we're going to do. I just can't wait to kind of lose myself in it and kind of forget everything else that's going on and just have fun doing what I love, which is covering Big Ten sports and connecting with fans and connecting with our analysts. And, that's what I hope they'll get out of Saturday.
Well, we're glad to have the Big Ten back. We're glad to have you back in a more prominent role in the Big Ten Network, and Jerry and Howard and all you guys. You're fun. You're a fun watch, and we're glad to have you guys back in the mix, and very much looking forward to the start of a Big Ten season. And as I mentioned, I think before we actually started recording, we are starting with Big Ten weather too. It's going to be cold and chilly and gray all over the conference on Saturday.
Yes, it is. Hey, can I leave you with one thought?
Of course.
This would be along the lines of The Graduate, plastics. I'm going to leave you with one thought, and that is the team we didn't talk about that we maybe should have.
Okay.
Indiana.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Indiana.
Okay.
Keep an eye on Indiana this year. I think they could be poised to have a really good year.
And Penn State starts at Indiana, and that is a tricky one for a tricky road trip for Penn State because Penn State's got very high hopes. It's a top 10 team to start the season, and you're right. I mean, the Hoosiers did a nice job under Tom Allen last year, so yeah, good way to end up on there. Keep an eye out for the Hoosiers. Dave, I really appreciate your time. Dave Revson from BTN, from the Big Ten Network. Enjoy it, man. Again, it was a long road to get here. Enjoy the start of the season on Saturday.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ralph. Always a pleasure, my friend.
And now, 3 and out. First down. Since I drew a little fire on Twitter, well, let's see, we're taping this on Tuesday morning as usual, Tuesday afternoon as usual, so I was fooling around on Twitter on Monday night. So yeah, Monday night, drew a little fire on Twitter for an Arkansas-related opinion. Let's just flesh that out here. I cannot stress this enough. The simple fact that the Razorbacks are a competitive SEC football team after 2 years, and really a little more than that, of being mostly a non-competitive SEC football team is remarkable. Sam Pittman and his staff deserve a lot of credit for quickly cleaning up a messy team and getting them to play hard, which I don't think was always the case the last couple of years. To be as bad as Arkansas has been requires serious dysfunction. Kudos to the first-year head coach for fixing some of that pretty quickly. It's also tempting to tout Arkansas should be 3-1, right? Because of a bad call that went against the Hogs in the Auburn game. I'm simply here to say we should probably settle down a little bit on Arkansas. They are currently +6 in turnover margin and needed 7 takeaways, including 2 defensive touchdowns, to beat Ole Miss last week. At a time in college football when you must have an above-average offense to be an above-average team, Arkansas is averaging 4.8 yards per play, better than only Vanderbilt in the SEC. Now here's the good news. There's something that you see a lot in college football where a team will steal a game or two early in the season, and suddenly the players start believing that they really are good. I made reference to this in our interview with Dave Revson. I think to a certain degree this happened with Minnesota last year. Win a couple of close games early, maybe steal one that could have gotten away, and all of a sudden you get a boost of confidence and you start playing like as good a team as your record is. That could possibly be the case here with Arkansas. Rising confidence, team plays better, get a little bit of luck early, and suddenly the season improves and you put together a real breakout year. Maybe that happens with the Razorbacks, but the current blueprint of averaging 2.5 interceptions per game and having the second worst offense in the SEC is really not a sustainable model for success. Second down, I am very excited for Iowa State at Oklahoma State this weekend. The Cowboys might get Spencer Sanders back at quarterback, and the early returns on their defense have been very good. Iowa State has already knocked off Oklahoma and has not beaten both the Sooners and the Cowboys in the same season since 1960. Listen, I doubt very severely that Oklahoma State is getting through this season unbeaten. In fact, I doubt any Big 12 team is getting through the championship with really even less than 2 losses. I firmly believe that Oklahoma might still end up coming through this thing, getting on a roll here and winning the conference with 2 losses. I just don't see enough separation between the teams that are considered the contenders and sort of the middle of the pack. With all these close games, I don't think anybody's going to have enough good fortune to get through unscathed. It's not a good setup to get a team into the college football playoff, but it should make the Big 12 maybe the most entertaining of the Power 5 conferences for the rest of the season, with lots of competitive games from week to week. Third down, just a few quick hitters on the rest of this weekend slate. I am quite worried about Notre Dame's lack of outside and downfield passing game. It will be tough for the Irish to beat Pitt on the road with just a run-heavy attack, and the Panthers beating a top 5 team to stop a 2-game losing streak would be perfectly Pitt. While I doubt any ACC team is staying within 14 of Clemson, I still think that North Carolina is the best bet among the ACC teams because of their offensive playmakers. Speaking of the Tar Heels, North Carolina and North Carolina State are playing this week with both teams ranked for the first time since 1993. No one cares about your almost predictions, but I will say this. I was very close to picking SMU to win the American instead of UCF before the season, and then I bailed and stuck with the safer pick, which seemed like UCF at the time. Now UCF's got 2 losses, and SMU is playing a huge game this weekend against Cincinnati, one of the other favorites in the conference. I love the Mustangs' explosiveness, and I'm not sure Cincinnati, which wants to sort of play mall ball with Luke Fickell there, can slow down SMU this weekend in Dallas. That's the show for today. I'd like to thank my producer, Sarah McCrory, for making me sound good. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Westwood One Podcasts. Please subscribe so you do not miss an episode. I'm Ralph Russo, the college football writer with the Associated Press. Thanks for listening, and come back for more next week of the AP Top 25 College Football Podcast.